Soft vegetable oils tend to be loaded with omega-6 linoleic acid. Our bodies convert omega-6 linoleic acid to highly unsaturated omega-6 fatty acids. Highly unsaturated omega-6 fatty acids compete for a place in our tissues with highly unsaturated omega-3 fatty acids. Since our bodies cannot choose from omega-6s and omega-3s, we need to get them in the right ratio in order to accumulate enough omega-3 highly unsaturated fatty acids and not too much omega-6 highly unsaturated fatty acids into our tissues. We want to accumulate enough omega-3 highly unsaturated fatty acids because omega-3 highly unsaturated fatty acids, called EPA and DHA, play important roles in health. We want to not accumulate too much omega-6 highly unsaturated fatty acids because the excess of an omega-6 highly unsaturated fatty acid, called arachidonic acid, causes disease in several ways. Western diets tend to have too high omega-6 to omega-3 ratios. This is particularly true about American and North European diets. This is an average US citizen. His tissue highly unsaturated fatty acids are primarily omega-6s. In other words, he has very low levels of omega-3 highly unsaturated fatty acids. Let's compare him to an average Japanese person. You can see that his tissue highly unsaturated fatty acids are primarily omega-3s. In other words, he has very low levels of omega-6 highly unsaturated fatty acids. The tissues of Japanese people are very high in omega-3s because Japanese consume only very small amounts of soft vegetable oils and they consume fatty fish every day. Fish is the primary source of omega-3s, EPA, and DHA in our diets. Americans have low levels of omega-3 highly unsaturated fatty acids because they do not eat much fish and they eat a lot of foods high in omega-6s, i.e. soft vegetable oils, shortenings, and poultry. I am sure you have heard that soft vegetable oils, nuts, and seeds contain omega-3s. It is true that they contain an omega-3 called alpha-linolenic acid. However, alpha-linolenic acid intake doesn't significantly improve omega-3 status because alpha-linolenic acid can only be poorly converted to omega-3's EPA and DHA, which are the omega-3s that actually matter. Only 3% of it gets converted to EPA, only 0 to 1% of it gets converted to DHA. That is why we need to eat fish. But that doesn't necessarily mean we should start eating like the Japanese or Eskimos. For most of us, it is probably much easier to switch to a more Mediterranean type diet. In the middle, we can see an average Mediterranean. He has almost equal amounts of highly unsaturated omega-3s and omega-6s in his tissues. This is because he eats fish several times a week and doesn't have that high omega-6 intake because the fat he eats is milk fat, animal fat, or olive oil. Olive oil, despite of being a soft vegetable oil, is relatively low in omega-6s. Diseases low levels of omega-3s and or omega-6 excess are linked to include heart disease, Alzheimer's, depression, several different types of cancer, chronic low-grade inflammation, and obesity. The association between omega-3 deficiency and depression is very strong. Here's some points and highlights. Omega-3 deficiency leads to impaired neuronal function. Omega-3 deficiency is also associated with suicide. Studies also link omega-3 deficiency to aggressive behavior in inmates. Studies show fish oil to be effective in the treatment of depression. Our bodies produce pro-inflammatory eicosanoids from omega-6 arachidonic acid. Anti-inflammatory eicosanoids, on the other hand, are produced from certain other highly unsaturated fatty acids, including omega-3s, EPA, and DHA. When we have too much omega-6 arachidonic acid and not enough omega-3s, EPA, and DHA, we produce way too many pro-inflammatory eicosanoids and are prone to chronic low-grade inflammation. Chronic low-grade inflammation is a risk factor for many diseases. There's a class of painkillers called NSAIDs. NSAIDs work through interfering with eicosanoid synthesis. NSAIDs simply compensate for the omega-3 deficiency and omega-6 excess Westerners suffer from. Many rheumatoid arthritis sufferers rely on NSAID called ibuprofen. Studies have shown that high-dose fish oil supplement combined with omega-6 moderated diet works just as well. It appears that when we have high enough omega-3, EPA, and DHA concentrations and low enough omega-6 arachidonic acid concentrations, we don't need to rely on NSAIDs, because this makes our bodies perfectly capable of regulating inflammation on their own. The connection between omega-6s and obesity in humans has not been well researched. Here are some highlights. Tissue omega-6 arachidonic acid is linked to overweight status and BMI in children. Increased intake of omega-6 linoleic acid has been linked to increased prevalence of obesity. But why would excess tissue omega-6 arachidonic acid promote weight gain? The body produces endocannabinoids from omega-6 arachidonic acid. Endocannabinoids affect metabolism, energy balance, and appetite. Animal studies have clearly demonstrated high omega-6 intake to induce weight gain despite of calorie restriction. Animal studies have also clearly demonstrated omega-3s to protect against high-fat diet-induced obesity. If omega-3 intake is high enough, rodents actually lose weight on a high-fat diet. Before dieters get too excited, I must tell you that these same studies showed that omega-3s did not protect against high glycemic load diet-induced weight gain. I know this video is controversial and possibly contradicts official dietary guidelines of your country, but those dietary guidelines are outdated and inaccurate as they have been hugely inspired by lipid hypothesis from 1960s. In the last few years, meta-analyses have disvalidated lipid hypothesis. They have made it abundantly clear that it is fish and fish oil that protect against heart attacks and heart disease mortality, and that soft vegetable oils do not have any such protective effects. They have also made it clear that there is no evidence of a connection between saturated fat consumption and heart disease mortality. We need to wake up and understand that we are robbing our bodies of omega-3s, EPA, and DHA with our excessive omega-6 intakes. The Japanese had this wake-up call in 1970s when the increased use of soft vegetable oils caused a cancer and heart disease epidemic in Japan's Okinawa Islands. The Japanese scientists called it excess linoleic acid syndrome. The Japanese government today advocates omega-6 to omega-3 ratio of 4:1, and 4:1 is the ratio in which an average Japanese gets his omega-6s and his omega-3s. What about Americans? Well, their dietary omega-6 to omega-3 ratio is something between 14:1 and 25:1. We as humans evolved on a diet that provided us with omega-6s and omega-3s in a ratio that was something between 2:1 and 1:2, depending on how much fish we were consuming. Some researchers insist we should get our omega-6s and our omega-3s in a ratio of 1:1. This video isn't just against soft vegetable oils, because just ditching soft vegetable oils isn't enough. Omega-6s are present everywhere. Besides moderating our omega-6 intake, we also need to amp up our intake of omega-3 highly unsaturated fatty acids, EPA, and DHA. This was onewithtao.com presentation that was based on my article, Omega-6 to Omega-3 ratio. Check it for references to studies that back up all claims presented in this video.